Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. It is madness time for college basketball. It is also madness when it comes to draft analysis because I'm just trying to get to the draft at this point, Greg. We got too much time between the combine and the actual draft itself. It makes me insane.
Yeah, there is a lot of time, but as you know, Buck, the way I do it, I watch all these guys on tape, and that's how I form my evaluation. And all the other noise does not change my evaluation because I finished. It's like I told you with Cam Ward, who appears now to be the Titans pick, which we'll have a lot of fun with when we do the install on May 2nd. But I told you after I did him, I did him before the combine. I told you that I think this guy's worthy of a number one pick in a draft, that he's that kind of talent. And it appears, we're still in March, but it appears that the Titans may be coming to the same conclusion.
Yeah. If only they could work on your timeline so that we could have this thing done and dusted before the combine. And, a little
Yeah.
clarity would have been nice, but that's fine.
Right.
No matter how they get there, as long as they get there, because God knows Titans fans need a little excitement in their life. And Cam Ward is certainly an exciting prospect. We'll see how that all comes to fruition. And to Greg's point, it will be interesting to break down quarterback play of Cam Ward in great detail on Friday, May the 2nd, like Greg mentioned, at the Analog room in the Hutton Hotel, where Greg and I are going to be hosting you guys, 250 of you, though you better get your tickets now. I was just telling Greg before the podcast started up, 20 of you bought VIP tickets just yesterday. So I don't know if that's a group that's coming into town or just the idea that people are getting more and more excited about the prospect of Cam Ward being the Titans quarterback. But it's going to be great to take questions from the audience, break down tape, and do it the way that we have the last 2 years, Greg. And certainly we've talked about quarterbacks basically the last 2 years, but this one's different.
Yeah, and we'll go into detail. We're going to leave that alone, obviously. Now we'll go into great detail on May 2nd, because I've watched probably 20 Cam Ward games going back to Washington State in 2023. In addition, obviously, to 9 or 10 games from the University of Miami this year. So I've seen a lot of Cam Ward.
Fair to expect that will be a big topic of discussion when we all get together in just a few months from now. But we're talking running backs today, and it is a fascinating class. Last year, Greg, the running back depth in the draft was not excellent, and there were a lot of quality free agent players. So you saw kind of the league go that direction with Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Tony Pollard here in Tennessee, getting contracts. This year, it's quite the opposite. It's not a great free agent running back class, but there are a ton of fun backs
Yeah.
in the draft. And the guy that I suppose we have to start with, because he's the total package, is Boise State's Ashton Jeanty.
Yeah, and just a quick backdrop. And we don't know if it's a trend because it's 1 year, but last year there were 5 or 6 running backs that had over 300 carries. That hadn't happened in quite a while. So we're not going to sit here and say that that means the league is changing and going back to running the ball. We don't know the answer to that question, but it was interesting that that's the way the league went a year ago. So will the run game now be seen as a little more important? And will that change the value of running backs as we go forward? We don't know the answer to that question. Maybe it doesn't at all. Maybe people still think don't draft a running back, get one in the 6th round. We don't know the answers to those questions. But the reality is, a year ago, the running game became a lot more important for a lot of teams. So I thought just wanted to put that out there because I think that's important to say because it was a different season in the NFL.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a point that's well made because people will remember, and this is obviously different, but and I don't know how well you know Mel Kiper, but Mel getting on TV last year and being like, "Oh, well, they need to ban 2 high safety looks from the NFL. It's limiting these fun
Right,
and
right.
exciting quarterbacks." Well, the best way to limit the 2 high safety looks is just run the hell out of the ball, make the defensive backs start to cheat up, and change the way that defenses play you. And you saw the NFL adapt to that trend or start to set that trend in a different direction. We know this about the league, right? Ebbs and flows with the way the teams
It's
approach these
cyclical.
things.
It's cyclical, and that's see. I think that's fun about the league. You don't want it to be the same thing. You don't want it to be cookie cutter where everybody plays the same way and looks the same. You want it to be different. But anyway, so getting to the backs, obviously you mentioned Ashton Jeanty, who's obviously a really really good back. I thought, but I will say this, okay, and to me, this is not a controversial statement in the least. I don't think he is at the traits level of Bijan Robinson. Um, I think Jeanty is a really good back who I thought was better and a little more explosive in 2024 than he was in 2023 because I did his tape last summer. Um, I think his elite trait, and this is truly elite, is his contact balance. He has such a low center of gravity. He's got the core strength, the leg drive to absorb hits with minimal balance and body control disruption. And he just maintains his momentum through the hits and the traffic. And I think that part of his running is truly elite.
Yeah, 5'9", 215 coming out of Boise State. Just a hair over 21 years old at this point in time. And Greg, to your point about how leagues or how the teams in the league will value the running back position, it just depends on how these teams are currently viewing their roster build, right? Nobody externally would have said, "Oh, Jahmyr Gibbs, he makes sense as a first-round pick, a top 15 pick to the Detroit Lions a couple of years ago." And in fact, Brad Holmes got a lot of heat for drafting an off-ball linebacker and a running back in the first round. But turns out that's what the Detroit Lions needed at the time that they were cycling up in their competitive in their window, essentially. And it ended up being such a good fit for that team.
The question I have with Jeanty is he the kind of true foundation back where the offense and the team runs through him? Obviously he's not Saquon Barkley. Barkley's, just a freak of nature. But I'm talking about stylistically and philosophically. The Eagles team ran through Barkley. That was really the foundation of their team. Is Jeanty that kind of back? I think that's an open question. And by the way, as I said, that elite trait is truly elite. We're talking about a really, really good back. I don't want people to think I don't think he's a good back, but these are the questions I just ask myself as I'm watching tape. I do a lot of talking to myself, Buck, when I watch tape. It's a fascinating experience. But
you know what? To be a fly on the wall as you're just kind of muttering through these things in your office, Greg. I would enjoy it.
It's just the mutterings of a crazy man as I'm watching tape. Yeah, that to me is the question. I think teams might be asking that as well when they discuss him. But there's no question we're dealing with a guy that has really strong traits, and he's a very good receiver as well. I think he can add to your offense in that regard. So we're dealing with a complete back. And as I said, the question becomes whether he is that guy that you build your offense around, expecting that he'll get 20 to 25 carries every week.
Yeah, he's coming off a career high as far as his collegiate career of snaps, 798 last year for Boise State. And to your point about just kind of how he is going to factor in for a team at the next level, it's fair to point out, and I'm sure you noticed this as you watch Boise State, they throw the ball around quite a bit. It's not just a volume running game entirely through him. And I thought that was an interesting kind of juxtaposition.
One final point before we move on. He ran a ton out of the I formation this year. 31% of his rushes came as an I back, meaning the quarterback's under center, and he's 7 to 8 yards behind the quarterback as an I back. And I think that's important because that's a whole different feel for a back than when you're a shotgun back. Pistol might be more similar, but it's just something that I think is important as he transitions to the league because teams now, you're seeing more teams go back to conventional play action. And by that, I mean the quarterback under center. So if you have a back that is used to lining up as an I back and has had meaningful snaps doing that, I think that's valuable in your transition to the league.
Oh, without question. Now to the classes, I would argue, most physically gifted running back, or one of the most physically gifted running backs in the draft class. Omarion Hampton out of North Carolina. Greg, he's one of my favorite guys to watch. I know that's, a popular opinion because he's one of the top players in this year's draft class, but I can't get over the combination, the size, the explosiveness. He's got such great little body strength, and I wonder what you see when you watch him on tape.
Yeah, I really liked his tape a lot. Another guy I did last summer as well. He's almost 6 feet, 221 at the combine. I mean, the profile that he presents, size, burst, speed, physicality, power, you could argue that's the best in the class. I don't think that is a bold statement. Again, I'm not comparing and saying who's better. We don't know the answer to that. but there's something about watching Hampton that when I watch him, and again, this is muttering to myself, where I just say, God, this guy looks like an NFL feature back. He just looks like that. And you basically echoed the same thing, Buck. I mean, there's just something about watching him. I mean, he has a physical presence as a runner. I think he can handle a heavy workload. I think he's a tempo setter type back. I think he can be the kind of back that controls the pace and tempo of games for an offense. I really liked watching this guy's tape, and I did it for 2 years. So I think he's a day one starter type back in the right system and a true foundation back. That's the way I felt when I finished my evaluation of Omarion Hampton.
I wonder if there were a couple of teams, Greg, that if you got to pick where he might land based on the system, to your point about being a day one starter, depending on the system, is there one team's run game that you would like to see him in particularly?
I mean, I think theoretically he could be in anybody's offense. The question is, are you committed to, because I think he's truly a volume back. I mean, you don't draft a Marion Hampton to give him the ball 9 times a game, you know. So I think he's a true volume back. I'm trying to think of the teams that I think would like to line up and run the football.
A lot of them already have running backs, right? The Eagles, the Ravens, the Titans.
Yeah.
And, it's not like the Titans, for example, couldn't add another running back. Derrick Henry's 30
No,
plus.
and I don't think the Titans would draft him because I don't think he'll get out of the first round. But he and Pollard are obviously totally different backs. Right. They're totally different stylistically. But as I said, I don't think you draft Hampton with the idea that you're going to give him 9 or 10 carries a game. This guy is a guy you want to line up, and he's sort of the starting point for your offense. And having said that, I don't mean that, oh, well, you don't pass the ball at all. That's not my point at all. But this kid just, when I watched him, he just looks like an NFL back.
I want to ask you, Greg, and this is more a general question than about specific prospects, but when you are evaluating running backs, how much are you factoring in, obviously, what they look like stylistically, what their physical traits are, but things like how they hold up in pass protection, because obviously that factors in a great deal for can they stay on the field? Can they be an every down back, essentially?
Yeah, you have to look at that without question. The other thing that I always look at is if a guy has a long run, like not a touchdown run, but maybe has a 30-yard run. Does he come out of the game? Does he stay in the game? Does he get the ball on the next play? Because to me, that's the foundation back mentality. See, I remember having an opportunity to talk to, and it's years ago, so I can't remember who it was, but it was a running back, and who was that kind of back. And there's a mentality that goes with that, Buck. It's not just physical traits. There's a mentality that goes with lining up every week and getting the ball 20, 22 times. I'm not talking about touches. I'm talking about runs. And there's guys that have traits, but they don't have that mentality, of just being able to do that snap after snap, week after week, and that's hard to do. It might have been LaDainian Tomlinson who I'm thinking of, but and obviously we know he's a Hall of Famer. It just that's a major part of being a foundation back. There's just a mentality that goes with that above and beyond the physical attributes.
It's a great transition into the next player that I'd like to talk about, Greg, Cam Skattebo out of Arizona State. Because God knows mentality is a great deal of his makeup. I've never seen a player try to individually will his team to win the way that this man did in the college football playoff against Texas. It was one of the best individual performances I saw on the college football season, but he's an interesting player. I think that he does have that mentality that you talk about. He also is very adept at breaking tackles and after contact. He's one of the better players in this class. What do you like about Cam Skattebo out of Arizona State?
He's a fun watch, and he's 219 pounds. He's only 5'9.5", but he's 219. And for whatever it's worth, and people do look at this, his vertical jump is almost 40 inches, which is very impressive. But he's not a great athlete. Like, you don't look at him and go, wow, there's a great athlete. But he is a tough, gritty, determined, competitive downhill runner. He's got balance. He's got natural power. He looks to initiate contact, and he thrives on the physicality of it. I mean, this guy embraces the physical component of the game. If you're being honest about what his tape shows, he's somewhat tight-hipped. He's got some core stiffness. As I said, you wouldn't say he possesses higher level athletic traits. He's not really an explosive guy, the way you think of it. And I'm talking about short area. I'm not talking about being a home run hitter. But there's no question that this guy is a tempo setter as a runner. I mean, he's got those sustaining traits. He gets hard yards. He's got a really physical profile. You have to think about the league. You can't automatically dismiss and say, well, this guy's not going to do this or this guy's not going to do that. Who thought Kyron Williams would come out of Notre Dame and he carried 316 times this year? Okay. Now, so you have to sort of step back and you can't just automatically say, well, I don't think he can do it.
Right.
I mean, Kyron Williams is not being anywhere near the most physically gifted back in the league, but yet for 2 years in a row, he's been a foundation back and had 316 carries and didn't even play the last game of the season. So, when you look at Skattebo, I mean, this guy's got a compact frame. He's got that physical and mental toughness. He's got elite contact balance. He finishes, hard yards is a really big deal. I talk about that all the time about when it's blocked for 3, you got to get 6 or 7. That's hard yards. That matters in the league a lot.
It's a good way for us to talk about Quinshon Judkins because Ohio State has a couple of running backs in this draft class, Greg, and Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. Judkins, a transfer player going from Ole Miss to Ohio State. He played significantly less snaps this year because of the presence of Henderson and the way that they were able to split up that that backfield. I'm curious to know what you feel about him specifically as you watched him, because he feels like one that could kind of be in that Kyron Williams conversation. Like maybe when you watch him or when people watch him, they see a player that might be more dependent on his situation. But then again, to your point, you have to think about what's in the league and how his skill set marries with the coaching staff that he might land with. And of course, that's something that we can't yet tell.
Are you talking Judkins?
Yes.
Yeah, Judkins is a really interesting guy because he's more of that rugged, he's stylistically a rugged back. He's kind of that downhill, decisive velocity runner. He's got natural power. He's got plus contact balance. He can run through tackles and finish runs. He'd probably fall more in the category of a grinder or a sustainer. He's not, even though he had a few long runs, he's not necessarily an explosive guy vertically. As I said, there were instances where he did stretch out his stride and take it to the house. I think he's one of those guys that if you run a lot of gap scheme, you run inside and mid zone concept. He's got that tight compact, sharp cutting ability. He's got really explosive short area burst. He's powerful. He's got a physical presence. He's almost the same size as Hampton, although it's funny when you put the tape on, Hampton looks like a bigger man, but they're essentially the same size. So he's one of those guys. He's falls into the sustainer category more than, wow, this is a big play back. And his teammate Henderson, he's the opposite. He's a big time explosive back.
Big play potential is something that I think Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee brings to the table. And it was unfortunate, Greg, that his college football season ended the way that it did, dealing with injury in that college football playoff game against Ohio State. He's a different kind of player, of course, than Jalen Wright, who came out of Tennessee last year, but he is one of the youngest prospects in this class. I really like what he could bring to a team. I think the thing that most people would say about him is that he certainly needs to cut down on his fumbles. Ball security is a thing there.
Yeah, Sampson was a guy, he's got an innate feel for the patience and discipline that are demanded, particularly in gap scheme runs. He really allowed his blocks to develop before showing, he has very good vision, short area burst. He's not a big back. That may well limit his deployment at the next level. I think that there is some explosiveness to him, but, and I know that his 40 times are good, but I don't think he runs exactly like that. I would say that he runs physically and competitively, even though he's not really big enough or strong enough to be naturally powerful,
right.
Because there's a difference between physical and powerful. And I think sometimes people get confused by that. There's a lot of backs who are smaller who run really hard and they're physical, but they're not powerful. They're not necessarily moving people. They just run really hard,
Yeah.
and he falls more into that category. He struck me more, maybe I'll be wrong. He struck me more as a complementary piece, not a feature type back. And maybe I'll be wrong.
Now, for the audience, if you've been listening for a while, you know the way that Greg and I do these is we typically talk about the top 4 or 5 players at any given position group, and then I always like to ask Greg one player who he's been watching
Ah,
that has particularly caught his attention. Greg, I know it's tough to pick from one out of
I
this
got one.
group of running backs,
Oh
but
no,
I
no,
know
I'm good.
I know
I'm
you're
good to go.
prepared today.
Yeah, I'm good to go. Because there's a lot of running backs in this draft, and the guy that fascinated me. Okay, and I'm really curious. This plays off what we spoke about at the beginning with the last year, but there being more, more 300 carry backs. Not that I'm saying this guy's going to come in the league and have 300 carries, but we'll see. The back I'm speaking about is Damien Martinez
Yep.
from the University of Miami, who started his career at Oregon State. Okay. I, the more I watch this guy, I mean, I'll tell you the guy I thought of watching this guy. I thought of Josh Jacobs, the Josh Jacobs of now, who's not
Hmm.
quite as explosive as he was when he first came in the league. I mean, Martinez has quickness. He's decisive. He's got burst. Now, this guy has natural power. I mean, this guy just runs through and over people. And I was fascinated by him. I mean, he's powerful. He's aggressive. He's determined. Um, I think this guy can be a foundation back in the league. We'll see how it all plays out, but this is a guy that I think can be that guy.
No, I love that you brought him up. And Greg, obviously I'm not grinding tape to the extent that you are, but I've been watching a lot more Cam Ward Miami games here lately. So you start to notice other players. Damian Martinez, man, just the way that he forces missed tackles. I want to say, Greg, though, that we talked earlier about pass protection, and he's somebody who could stand to improve in that category in particular.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and again, sometimes backs like that don't play on third down anyway.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't know if he'd be that guy. But and that's important. I don't want to say that's not important at all. But this guy, I mean, I watched a ton of tape of. I watched him last summer at Oregon State too, where he was an eye back, and he was not an eye back at Miami. So he has a ton of experience as an eye back and a shotgun slash pistol back. So he's run in multiple systems. When I watched him at in 2023 at Oregon State, I thought that, oh, could he fill the same kind of role as a David Montgomery, who carried more than 200 times in each of his first 5 seasons and would have this year if he didn't miss 3 games. But then when I watched him this year at the U, and he was not really a foundation back, I think he only had 150, 160 carries because they threw the ball so much. He just, to me, has those kinds of traits. I mean, I think, if you want to have an offense that features a strong run blocking O line, a defined play action pass game, I think this guy can easily be your back. And, that's why it's so much depends, Buck, on where you go,
Yeah.
the offense. Like I said, Kyron Williams to me is such a great example of that because, who would have thought coming out of Notre Dame that this is what he'd become in the league? No one would have said that.
Absolutely. Well, Greg, it's a fun position group to talk about in this draft class. I'm looking forward to doing more of these draft previews when next we get together, do a little defensive line and edge talk and which is also a very talented and deep position group,
Yes.
specifically the edge and the interior defensive line. So
The D tackles, I was told by someone in the know that there could be 20 D tackles taken in the first 3 rounds.
it's completely feasible based on what you hear coaches and scouts talk about these guys. And so, and we know the premium that's placed on getting to the quarterback. Everybody saw the Super Bowl, same as we did, Greg, and the way that Patrick Mahomes was made to look
Yep.
slightly more mortal with, and Philadelphia obviously drafts very, very well and has a platoon system there. So one guy is not going to be able to do that for you, but still, there's a lot of talented players in that group, and we'll look forward to previewing that next week when we get together. Thank you, sir.
That was fun, Buck. Looking forward to next week.